The title of this talk is about Ulsterville Presbyterian Church and memorials. So the memorials that we'll be talking about include headstones, memorial windows, and the war memorial that was formerly that is in the church. So this talk came about as a result of after Ulsterville closed, I visited a coffee shop called the Vestry, and then also I picked up a copy of C.T.E. Carson's book about the history of Ulsterville Presbyterian Church. And also I noticed the final resting place of Reverend Jameson in Ballyvester Cemetery outside Donegadee. So that's where this talk originated from.
Okay, this map shows the area of South Belfast at the second edition, which is sort of the middle or third quarter of the 19th century. At that stage, Donegal Road was called Blackstaff Lane, University Road was called Botanic Road, Malone Road was called Old Lisburn Road, and Lisburn Road was called the New Malone and Lisburn Road. In this slide you can see that the area is more built up, with the school on Donnybrook Street and the Independent Church on Edinburgh Street being marked. St Thomas Church of Ireland is now marked as well, as are the buildings at Methody. In the fourth edition of the Osney Historical Maps, the area is fully built up, with Fane Street Public Elementary School and Windsor Park being recorded.
So this slide shows the new school built in Donnybrook Street at a cost of £1,050, which is approximately £99,500 in current terms, and the newly formed Lower Windsor congregation under the leadership of the Reverend Thomas Edward Culbert used these premises. The opening services for Lower Windsor Presbyterian Church was held on 13th January 1901, the preachers being the Reverend William John Jackson of Dunkern Presbyterian Church in the morning, and the Reverend Henry Montgomery of Albert Street Presbyterian Church at the evening service, as you can see on this overhead. Henry Montgomery later founded the Shankle Road Mission and became a moderator of the Presbyterian Church in Ireland, known as the Shankle Shepherd. Newspaper clippings from that time record that a meeting of those interested in the Lower Windsor Presbyterian Church was held in the school at Donnybrook Street on Sabbath 7th April 1901, with the Reverend T.E. Culbert presiding. Reverend Culbert subsequently accepted a call to Boviva in County Londonderry, and the Reverend Thomas Rogers was ordained as the minister on Thursday 14th August 1902. This slide shows the Edinburgh Street, the old building. In 1901, Belfast Street Directory, the only building on Lorne Street was Windsor Independent Church, whose minister was the Reverend James Craig, who lived nearby at 88 Melrose Street. The building was sold to the Primitive Methodist Church, from whom it was purchased by the Presbyterian Church for £1,350, with the excess of £300 being spent on repairs and renovations. These included the installation of a small bore pipe heating system by Musgrave and Company of Albert Bridge Road. In current terms, the cost of purchase, repairs and renovations would equate to more than £154,600. The nascent congregation had obtained permission from the General Assembly to change the name of the congregation, and the opening services for Ulsterville Presbyterian Church at the Edinburgh Street premises took place on Sunday 3rd May 1903. The Reverend John Stewart of Rathgar in Dublin was the preacher at both services, and at the close of the morning service he said that the church was in an exceedingly tasteful and comfortable condition. The ecclesiastical column in the Northern Whig on Monday 4th May 1903 stated that the Reverend Thomas Rogers and the Committee of Ulsterville Presbyterian Church, Edinburgh Street, are to be commended for the efforts they have made to meet the requirements of the spiritually inclined inhabitants of the Lower Windsor district. The article also stated that seating accommodation has been provided for about 600 persons. The article also reported that members of the congregation had also worked there night after night, giving their time, labour and skill free. The burning bush crest of the Presbyterian Church and a plaque can be seen above the doors in this photograph. So the Edinburgh Street building is still standing and is now where the Belfast Chinese Community Church meets. Although the Presbyterian Church of Ireland crest has been removed, the plaque records that it was the Ulsterville Presbyterian Church Hall after the relocation to Mount Prospect. This slide shows the Reverend Thomas Rogers. He was born in Carrickfergus on 20th July 1869. After attending a number of schools, including Inns, Rogers matriculated at Queen's College in 1889. He entered Assembly College in 1896 and was awarded the Getty Prize before obtaining a scholarship to McCabe College in Londonderry in 1898. He began his assistantship in Downshire Road, Newry, in August 1902, and in December of that year, in other words, only 4 months later, the Church Extension Committee unanimously selected him to succeed Mr. Culbert in Lower Windsor, with instructions to, quote, organise a congregation within 2 years at the furthest. On 3rd April 1929, owing to failing health, the Reverend Rogers resigned the pastoral charge of Ulsterville and accepted a call to a lighter charge at Maccaragall near Lisburn. Thomas Rogers remained at Maccaragall until his retirement in 1942, and he subsequently resided in Windsor Avenue. He died on 29th of October 1949, aged 80, and is buried in Carnmoney Main Cemetery. Newspaper reports recorded Ulsterville as having the largest Sunday school in all Ireland, and was where the Reverend W.P. Nicholson gave many fiery sermons. His nickname was the Tornado of the Pulpit, so you can imagine the style of his preaching. Other reports claimed that Ulsterville was, open quotes, once one of the city's busiest churches and seat of firebrand preacher Reverend W.P. Nicholson. Both these quotes are incorrect, because he was a guest preacher. Reverend William Nicholson was born in Bangor on 3rd April 1876. He spent his early years on his father's cargo ship and began to preach in 1899 at the age of 23 and was known for his men-only meetings. Nicholson used straightforward language which communicated to the common man. In the Belfast shipyard of Harland Wolff, a shed named the Nicholson Shed was erected to house stolen tools that newly converted workers were returning as a result of Nicholson's preaching. Nicholson was taken ill whilst returning from the United States and was taken to the Victoria Hospital. The ship docked at Cork. He died of renal failure and myocardial infarction on 29th October 1959, exactly 10 years to the day after the death of Thomas Rogers. William Patterson Nicholson is buried in Clandyboy Cemetery in Bangor, and alongside his name on the headstone is a reference to John 3 verse 30, "He must increase, but I must decrease." Alongside his date of birth, the headstone also records born again 22nd May 1899. Unfortunately, his second forename is misspelt on the headstone, where it's recorded as Pattison, but it's actually Patterson.
Whilst this talk is generally chronological, we're going to be jumping around just a wee bit. The memorial tablet for the Great War was made of white Italian marble on a black stone mount and was erected by the teachers and scholars of Ulsterville schools and was dedicated in a special service on Tuesday 7th November 1926. The preacher at the service was the Reverend R.W. Hamilton, and the names of the fatalities were read out by the Reverend Thomas Rogers. The tablet was unveiled by Dr. Joseph Fulton, of whom we will hear more soon, who said that the memorial would be an incentive to people to live at peace with God and their fellow men. There are anomalies between the memorial tablet and the entry for the congregation in the Presbyterian Church of Ireland's Roll of Honour book. For example, the Craig brothers of Cusick Street, the memorial tablet records that Edward died and William survived, but the PCI Roll of Honour records the reverse. Whilst there is a Commonwealth War Graves Commission fatality record for a William Craig, there isn't one for Edward Craig with a Belfast connection. There are several interesting potential case studies on the memorial. John Hopkins of Northbrook Street enlisted for war service along with two of his sons. John Hopkins Sr. was born in 1869 and was 45 years old when he enlisted, but gave his age as 34. Samuel Ernest Sidney Fitzsimmons was a student at the Marlborough Street Teacher Training College at Glasnevin in Dublin when he received a commission with 14th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles. At the end of the war, he was heavily involved in the arrangements for the transportation of the unknown soldier to Westminster Abbey. He was made a member of the Order of the British Empire and was awarded the Médaille du Roi Albert by the King of the Belgians. We're going to be looking at one fatality from the Great War, along with some of the survivors whose names appear on the memorial tablet. Henry Palmer McCashin was born on 29th December 1894 at University Road in Galway to John Hazlitt McCashin, a bookkeeper, and Jane Frances Palmer. The family lived at Dunluce Avenue, and Henry was a clerk when he enlisted with 14th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles. He was killed in action on 1st July 1916 at the age of 21 and has no known grave, being commemorated on the Thiepval Memorial in France. He is also commemorated on this family memorial in Belfast City Cemetery. Jane McCashin received a war gratuity of £8 in November 1919 and a dependence pension of 6 shillings per week. On the memorial tablet, Henry's surname is recorded as McCaskin rather than McCashin. Two sons of Samuel Patterson, a nursery salesman, and Mary Patterson, née Hutchinson, volunteered for war service in 1915. James Hutchinson Patterson was born on 27th January 1893 at Gaffican Street and was a clerk when he enlisted with the 18th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles. He was posted to the 8th Battalion on the Western Front after December 1915 and was serving with 15th Battalion when he was reported missing in March 1918 during the Battle of St. Quentin. He subsequently was located and was serving with 3rd Battalion when he was discharged on 31st March 1919, and he received a 30% disablement pension in respect of gas poisoning at the rate of 12 shillings per week from 1st April 1919 until January 1922. Samuel Patterson, his brother, was born on 4th July 1895 at Great Northern Street, and he also enlisted with the Royal Irish Rifles, being posted to the 15th Battalion on the Western Front after 1915. He was transferred to the Army Service Corps in March 1919 and was discharged from the Army a month later. He was awarded a 30% disablement pension in respect of multiple gunshot wounds to the left thigh, also at the rate of 12 shillings per week from 1st April 1919. The memorial tablet for the Great War records a G. Neil with the Black Watch. George Neil was born around 1894 in England, to George Neil, a painter by trade, and Annie Robinson. In 1911, the family was living at Tate's Avenue, but had moved to Windsor Terrace by 1918. Windsor Terrace comprised 10 houses on the Lisburn Road between Edinburgh Street and Lower Windsor Avenue, and the buildings are still present today, although they are no longer family homes. George Neil was recorded as being a painter when he married Sarah Coulton on 15th October 1919 at Malone Presbyterian Church, the ceremony being conducted by the Reverend Thomas Rogers. On Saturday 10th November 1934, the bugle party, as displayed on the screen from the 34th BB Company, under the command of George Neil, sounded the last post and the reveille in the act of remembrance in front of 20,000 spectators at Windsor Park before a match between Linfield and Belfast Celtic. Linfield won the game by 2-1. In addition to his work with the BB, George Neil was elected to the Congregational Committee in 1923 at the age of 30. 2 years later, he was made an elder and served as an elder until his death in 1963. He was also Clerk of Session from 1948 to 1963. George Neil was living at 391 Lisburn Road when he died in hospital on 10th April 1963, aged 68. Sarah, or Sadie Neil, was living at the same property when she died in hospital on 10th November 1978. George and Sarah Neil are buried in Dundonald Cemetery, but there is no memorial at the grave. The development of the site at Mount Prospect was delayed by the introduction of new building regulations by Belfast Corporation, and the plans for the building were passed in September 1922. This newspaper shows the building site when the foundation stones were laid. It had been decided to follow the Ballysillan model, and James Henry of Crumlin Road was engaged to construct the Ulsterville Church building at a cost of just over £10,000. That would be in excess of £422,200 in current terms. Clearance work on the site commenced in January 1923, and the foundation stones were laid on 21st April 1923 by the Lady Mayoress, Mrs. Agnes Turner, the Right Honourable Hugh McDowell Pollock, Minister of Finance, Dr. Joseph Fulton, Catherine Booth Clibborn, the daughter of the founder of the Salvation Army, Mr. David Irwin, JP, and a Mrs. McCleary. In this architect's drawing for the proposed Ulsterville Church, one can see some differences compared to Ballysillan Church. As can be seen from these two photographs, the final Ulsterville Church is almost identical to Ballysillan Church, with the lancet windows in the side towers being different to those in the architect's drawing. Although 6 foundation stones were laid, the only one that is currently visible at the former church building is the stone laid by the Lady Mayoress, and it can be seen between the 2 main doors at the front of the church. It was originally intended to build the church in Scrabo stone, but a shortage of supply resulted in the construction using the same type of stone as that used in the wall at Dundonald Cemetery.
Ballysillan Presbyterian Church was designed by Samuel Stevenson, whose architectural practice was located at Royal Avenue, and as we've heard, was used as a model for several other Presbyterian churches. His company also designed several of Belfast's landmark buildings, as can be seen in this slide, including Gallagher's Tobacco Factory, the Belfast Municipal Technical Institute, the Grand Central Hotel on Royal Avenue, and the Belfast Cooperative Society building on York Street. Samuel Stevenson died at his house Clonvara in Jordanstown on 23rd February 1924 and was buried in Belfast City Cemetery 2 days later. And this slide depicts both Stevenson and his final resting place. Samuel Stevenson and Sons is still operational in Belfast to this day, based on Ormeau Avenue. This newspaper image from the Ballymena Weekly Telegraph of 12th January 1924 and the newspaper notices indicate that the new Ulsterville Church was officially opened on 2 successive Sundays in January 1924. On 6th January 1924, the Reverend D.M. McIntyre of Glasgow was the preacher, and the Reverend F. Gibson of Ormond Quay Church in Dublin was the preacher on 13th January 1924. This image shows the church interior. According to newspaper reports, the church had a seating capacity for 1,000 people, and the congregation consisted of 600 families, with 600 pupils enrolled at the Sabbath school under the tutelage of 48 teachers.
At a joint meeting of Kirk Session and the Congregational Committee in August 1923, Thomas Rogers had announced that a friend who wished to remain anonymous had offered to fund the purchase and installation of a pipe organ in the new church. In 1924, it was revealed that the anonymous donor was Dr. Joseph Fulton, who also offered to pay for the construction of a new oak pulpit to complement the organ. The organ was constructed by Norman and Beard of London and was to cost just over £1,000. In September 1924, the Fulton organ was presented to the congregation in a service at which the moderator of the General Assembly, the Right Reverend Robert Wilson Hamilton, presided. The total cost of the organ and pulpit was around £1,900, which would equate to over £80,000 in current terms. So who was this guy Joseph Fulton? We've heard that he unveiled the War Memorial tablet and that he laid one of the foundation stones. Well, he was born on 11th February 1864 to Samuel Fulton and Elizabeth Spears, who farmed land at Ballyhartfield near Templepatrick. He married Jane Brown Corrie Sefton on 8th January 1902 at Windsor Presbyterian Church. Joseph Fulton was a member of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, and he entered the service of the Belfast Board of Guardians in 1899 as an assistant medical officer in the Union Infirmary and Fever Hospital, which would be better known as the Workhouse Infirmary. He was appointed as a permanent visiting surgeon in 1904 and visiting medical officer in 1906. He provided medical services to the Belfast Union Infirmary and Fever Hospital until 1939. Joseph Fulton lived at Windsor Terrace, a block of 4 houses between Windsor Avenue and Derryvolgie Avenue, and that's also where he had his surgery. He was well known for using unconventional methods. He lanced a boil with a penknife, and he also was renowned for carrying out operations on his kitchen table. He was known as the half-crown doctor, as that was his standard charge, irrespective of the circumstances. He also referred to all female patients as Maggie and all male patients as James. Joseph Fulton died at his home, Claremont, on Windsor Avenue on 19th March 1940 at the age of 76 and is buried in Carnmoney Cemetery. He was an uncle of the more well-known Dr. Fleming Fulton.
Samuel Rushton Jameson was educated at McCabe College in Londonderry, Trinity College Dublin and the Presbyterian College in Belfast. He graduated from Trinity in 1915 and was licensed by the Belfast Presbytery in 1916. Later that year he decided to take deacon's orders in the Church of Ireland and was ordained to the curacy of Ballymoney in 1918 as curate of St Stephen's Free Church of Ireland at Millfield in Belfast. In 1922 the General Assembly granted Jameson's request to be received back in the Presbyterian Church, and in April 1923 he was installed at Lone Ends at Templepatrick. 3 years later he received a call to Ballyroney, County Down, where he remained until 1930 when he arrived at Ulsterville, serving there until his retirement in 1948. Reverend Jameson then went to live in Donaghadee and shortly afterwards became the moderator of the Belfast Presbytery. Reverend Samuel Rushton Jameson died on 20th October 1954, aged 72, and is buried in Ballyvester Cemetery in Donaghadee. His 7-year break in service affected his pension entitlement and excluded his wife from receiving a widow's pension. The Congregational Committee had many discussions about this, but Mrs. Jameson did not receive a supplement.
Moving on to the Second World War, this combined memorial tablet records the names of 10 fatalities from the Great War and 20 from the Second World War. This in itself is unusual, as generally when one looks at memorial tablets there are more fatalities for the First World War than the Second. There is also a memorial window which is dedicated to the members of the congregation who laid down their lives in the two world wars. It features the insignia of the Royal Navy, the British Army, the Royal Air Force, the Merchant Navy and the Civil Defence Services. There are 3 panels which feature vehicles associated with the 3 armed services. There's a jeep and a tank under the Army insignia, a ship and a submarine under the Royal Navy insignia, and the Spitfire and Hurricane aircraft under the Royal Air Force insignia. William Allen was born on 8 September 1923 in Antrim District to William Allen, a packer, and Mary Allen, formerly Armstrong, and they were living at 194 Tates Avenue in 1939. William Jr. was educated at Fane Street Public Elementary School and was 15 years old when he joined the Royal Navy. He was 16 when he died on 9th June 1940, when HMS Glorious was attacked and sunk by the German battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau in the Norwegian Sea. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission database records that 1,172 men died on HMS Glorious on that date, and this included 15 Royal Air Force men from 802 and 823 squadrons, as Glorious was an aircraft carrier. At least 24 men from Northern Ireland and 31 from Eire died on HMS Glorious, but as there is no address recorded on the CWGC database for a significant number of the fatalities, the figures for either jurisdiction could be higher. During the German air raid on Belfast on the night of 15-16 April 1941, a fire crew from Auxiliary Fire Service Post AF6 was being driven along Royal Avenue to attend a fire at the London Midland and Scottish Railway Station at York Street. A bomb exploded near the Belfast Central Library, resulting in injury to several members of the crew and the deaths of 2 men, including George Spence of Tates Avenue. George was born around 1923 to Thomas William Spence and Mary Bradford, who had married at Great Victoria Street Presbyterian Church on 21st April 1919. George Spence was employed as an electrician and was 17 years old when he died. The Northern Ireland War Memorial Archive records that he is buried at Ballylesson Churchyard, but as yet I have been unable to locate his grave. George Spence is also commemorated in the Second World War Book of Remembrance for Great Victoria Street Presbyterian Church, and on the Belfast Civil Defence Services Memorial in Belfast City Hall, as displayed on the slide. This was unveiled in May 1955 by the Lord Mayor of Belfast, Alderman Sir Percival Brown, who had been chairman of the Belfast Civil Defence Services during the Second World War. The list of fatalities for the Second World War includes one female, and that was Sister Annie Mary Gardner, who was serving with the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service when she lost her life on 7th December 1942 at the age of 26. She is commemorated on the Brookwood 1939-1945 Memorial in England. Annie Mary Gardner was born on 9th April 1916 to William James Gardner and Lizzie Killock, who farmed land at Ballyrobin near Stranocum. She did her nursing training at Belfast City Hospital before moving into private nursing, and this was when she would have been attending Ulsterville Presbyterian Church. Annie Gardner was reported as missing in December 1942, but it was not until August 1943 that her death was confirmed by the military authorities. Newspapers in 1943 reported that she had been killed in action, but in memoriam notices placed by the family recorded that she had died at sea due to enemy action. 27 of Annie's nursing comrades, including at least 3 other Irish nurses, died in the sinking of the ship. It's not clear whether it was a hospital ship or whether the nurses were being transported to a theatre of war.
Robert Armstrong Dunn was a 27-year-old insurance agent living at Maryville Street in Belfast. He was also actively involved in a number of youth organisations, including the Boys Brigade in Ulsterville. On 10th March 1945, Dunn and schoolboy Arthur Walker Martin were walking on Cave Hill when they lost their way as darkness descended. Both fell 90 feet from the hill into a quarry below. Despite being seriously injured, Arthur Martin went to seek help, with 2 men subsequently finding Robert Dunn lying at the base of the cliff seriously injured. Sadly, Robert succumbed to his injuries and was buried in Dundonald Cemetery. Recording a verdict of accidental death, the city coroner, Dr. H.P. Lowe, commented that Dunn's death would be a great loss to the youth organisations with which he had been connected. The Robert Armstrong Dunn Cup was subsequently presented to Ulsterville Presbyterian Church, and there is also a plaque to commemorate Robert Dunn. George Stanley McCune was born at Alliance Avenue in Belfast on 1st August 1915 to Robert Lemon McCune and Mary Lyons. His father was one of the first 3 missionaries of the Quaibo mission and was secretary of the mission in 1915. George was educated at Methody, Magee College and Trinity College Dublin, and was assistant in Alexandra Church in Belfast before he was ordained in Kilkeel on 14th March 1946, where he remained for 8 years before his installation at Ulsterville on 25th March 1954. McCune was renowned for his Harvest of the Sea services, which is the theme of this stained glass window in his memory here. Reverend McCune had indicated that he would be applying to the General Assembly in June 1984 for leave to retire. Sadly, he died unexpectedly on St Patrick's Day 1984, 17th of March, and was buried in Drumbeg Cemetery.
We're going to finish off by going back to the Ulsterville Church building and seeing just how it's been changed since the congregation closed. This view of the interior of the church dates to 1924, before the installation of the organ and pulpit. As the Ulsterville building has protected status, there were limitations on what the current owners could do with the building. The sale agreement also stipulated restrictions on what the new owners could do with stained glass windows. So this is a current view of the interior. The gallery has been turned into a series of office cubicles and meeting rooms, whilst the ground floor is a showroom for upmarket house furniture and furnishings. As you can see, a lot of the interior elements of the church have been retained, the columns and so forth. The arts and crafts style interior doors have been retained throughout the building. There were 2 at the entrance to the auditorium, 2 next to the pulpit, and 2 would have been giving access to the pews in the balcony. A series of stained glass windows have also been retained, although the window that features Noah's Ark is not visible. The windows have scriptural themes, although I'm not sure of the relevance of the thistle image. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings this talk to a conclusion. Thank you very much for your patience and endurance.
And forbearance. Thank you.
Thank you.